Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We're going to spend some time in this next 2 hours looking at a variety of issues, but also picking up some of the pieces from yesterday. Some of you certainly wanted to call in and express your opinion about who you may or may not vote for in this presidential election. We'll talk about some of that and give those of you a chance who did not make it through to express your opinion, so feel free to do so. In just a few minutes, we're also going to be talking with General Boykin. General Jerry Boykin, as you may know, is an individual that has served with distinction, one of the founding members of Delta Force, and we'll talk a lot more about his career as a 36-year veteran. But he was invited to speak at prayer breakfast on D-Day at Fort Riley at the Big Red One. But they decided, nope, they didn't want to take him because it was a Christian message, and that in large part had to do with the protests that came from Mickey Weinstein, who is the founder of the Military Religious Freedom Foundation. So I did want to talk with him about this. We've mentioned it, but I wanted you to hear it from him as well. And also just talk about how it is becoming more and more difficult as a Christian in the military to express your faith. These are some issues that we've talked about with Kelly Shackelford. He has a whole division of First Liberty addressing just the military issues, how difficult it is sometimes for chaplains. So we wanted to spend some time talking with him, and we'll do that in our next segment. But then we're going to open up for your comments, certainly, about this presidential election. And so if you want to even join me in the first segment, you can, or wait a little bit. We'll certainly, after General Boykin goes, give you that opportunity, and we'll get into more of those details. But just before we chat with him, I did want to cover a couple of stories that we have been wanting to get to and just haven't been able to do so. And one of those has to do with the Internal Revenue Service. Now, if you go back 4 years, you might remember, and we have talked about this on the program many times before, of a number of conservative groups, many of them had the words Tea Party in their name, who were never actually given their tax-exempt status, or were given it so late as to have no impact on the particular election 4 years ago. And I even wrote about this in a commentary last year, that many people were calling for the impeachment of the current IRS director. And I think there's a lot more evidence for why that needs to take place, based upon the fact that we just now have stories that have come out that the IRS actually provided a list of 426 conservative groups that were singled out for additional scrutiny when they applied for tax-exempt status. I might mention, too, that also does not include about 40 different groups that opted out of the lawsuit, so really the actual number is 466. And while I'm talking about this number, remember that number 466, it's worth mentioning that the original number we had from the Treasury inspector was 298. And the IRS so far has not really explained why the latest number is so much larger. But one of the theories is that the IRS, when it came under fire, began to add some names of liberal groups in order to hide what they were doing. But if you go back to my October commentary, and then I'll take some phone calls from some of you that have already called in, it is important to recognize that many people are calling for an impeachment of the IRS director for a couple of reasons. Number one, he could be impeached for dereliction of duty because he failed to disclose the disappearance of these IRS emails germane to the congressional investigation. Those are the emails of Lois Lerner. He could be impeached for failure to comply because he and his agency have not complied with the investigation. And he could be impeached for breach of trust because of his refusal to testify accurately before Congress and due to his failure to keep his promises to Congress. And so the person doing this investigation is Representative Jason Chaffetz, and he's the chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. And he says the IRS has lied to Congress and destroyed documents and subpoenas. And he's even accused the IRS director and chairman of lies, obfuscation, and deceit. So I'm suggesting that this latest revelation of 466 groups and really this attempted delay to actually provide the tax-exempt status to those groups, along with all sorts of other things, certainly is reason enough. And I think it's worth mentioning, just before I take my first phone call here, that this list only came after a 3-year lawsuit from the Tea Party groups and then a ruling from the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals just to get the names that are now in the news. That tells you a lot about the kind of cover-up taking place there in the Internal Revenue Service. Let's take some phone calls along the way, and of course, all through the program today, we'll give you that opportunity. We'll go out to California on the Internet. David, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Oh, well, hi, Kirby. I was spurred to call when you were talking about who would I like to see elected.
Sure.
I had an old relative, one of my great-great-great-grandfathers, helped sign the Declaration of Independence, John Hart from New Jersey.
Wow.
And, you know, the original principles, there were 3 really good catchphrases that brought everybody together. It was united you stand, divided we fall. It was taxation with representation, and it was equal justice under the law. And so those 3 things, no matter what religion you were, no matter what political stripe you were, you wanted to be able to have taxation with representation. You wanted to have equal justice. You wanted to have united nation. And the idea that these candidates right now are working actively to divide people, I'm not interested in any candidate. When I was... My ears perked up when you were talking about Jason Chaffetz. If you get a chance, there's a book that was written about 10 years ago called Our Stolen Future, and it's basically about pollution issues and how pollution is really poisoning little children, poisoning children in utero, or infants or fetuses in utero. And so they're born not only blind and with all sorts of mental disabilities, but they're also now being born with malformed sex organs.
Wow.
So you're seeing a really rising growth of children who are born either both sexes or in most cases they're actually sterile children. So now this whole bathroom issue, you know, all of this North Carolina bathroom police kind of junk, this is an issue that really stems from pollution. And the polluters have known for years what they've been doing. They've been poisoning us for years. They've been getting away with murder. They're not paying the medical bills. And so now they're actually going out of their way to divide America. About whether or not we need bathroom police or whether we need gay police or whether or not we need, you know, this, that, or the other. The fact of the matter is that a huge amount of kids and a growing amount of kids are being born with either no sex organs or multiple sex organs.
Okay, well, let me check into it. I'm going to have to take a break, but that's a new book for me, and that's something I've not read about before. But again, I see that you're looking for a candidate that's going to unite us rather than divide us. So I appreciate your comments, and we're going to come back after the break and spend some time talking with the Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin. And he was invited, as I mentioned, to speak at the D-Day anniversary event. And then they decided because of, quote, scheduling conflicts, he could not speak. But then they made it real clear they would never invite him back again. So we wanted to give you a chance to hear from him. And also, once again, focus on how we can and should support and pray for those in the military. We'll talk with Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Last month, Nicholas Kristof stirred the political waters when he wrote an op-ed with the title A Confession of Liberal Intolerance. The response to his piece led to a second one with the title The Liberal Blind Spot. He began his first piece by acknowledging that we progressives believe in diversity and want women, blacks, Latinos, gays, and Muslims at the table so as long as they aren't conservatives. He concludes the liberals are fine with people who don't look like them as long as they think like them. He quotes from Professor George Yancey, who is a sociologist who is also a black evangelical. Yancey, who's been on my radio program, says that he's faced some problems as a black outside of academia, but faced many more problems inside academia because he was a Christian. Nicholas Kristof seemed appalled at the response to his first op-ed, hence the reason for his second commentary. Liberals have written that much of the conservative worldview consists of ideas that are known to be empirically to be false. Another asked facetiously, how about we make faculties more diverse by hiring idiots? Although he gives good examples of outstanding people in various fields that are evangelicals, his liberal friends will have none of it. That is why he is calling on his readers to begin to tackle their liberal blind spot. He cites a survey that shows that a majority of academics in some fields would discriminate against a job seeker that was an evangelical. He says that feels like bigotry. Part of the problem may be that liberals are isolated and don't know any evangelicals. He reminds us of surveys that show Americans have negative views of Muslims when they don't know any. He says that he suspects that many liberals disdain evangelicals in part because they don't have any evangelical friends. I applaud Nicholas Kristof for his observations. Sadly, I doubt that it will have much of an impact on the millions of closed-minded liberals. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Well, if you're listening to Point of View last Friday, you know that Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, and I spent a little bit of time talking about Lieutenant General William Boykin, Jerry Boykin, and we did so because of what was happening there at Fort Riley. The first Big Red One didn't decide that they wanted to have him come and speak for a D-Day anniversary event, and so we spent some time talking about that. And, of course, you might have heard from him recently because when I was in Israel and Greece, we had Representative Louis Gohmert sitting in this chair, and he actually did an interview with Jerry Boykin. That was before some of this unfolded. And if you're not familiar, Jerry Boykin's been on the program many times before, serves as the Executive Vice President at the Family Research Council, one of the original members of the U.S. Army's Delta Force, later was privileged to command all those elite warriors and even commanded the Army's Green Beret as well as the Special Warfare Center and School. Spent 36 years in service. And General Boykin, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
I am delighted to be with you.
You know, I have such respect for the military, and I think of the Big Red One, and then when I find out that Fort Riley, at least some of the leadership there, decided to, in a sense, disinvite you. Now, they claim that there were scheduling conflicts, but I've got to believe that it was the complaints from Mikey Weinstein, the founder of the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, which is the reason they decided to no longer allow you to speak. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. This Military Religious Freedom Foundation raised Cain with the commander of the Big Red One, the 1st Infantry Division, and they canceled my prayer breakfast there. And look, here's what we need to focus on, is the fact that in doing that, what the commander of the 1st Infantry Division actually did was he usurped the First Amendment rights of all of the soldiers and civilians that wanted to be at that prayer breakfast. He gave in to what I consider to be probably an atheist, anti-Christian, and I believe anti-American organization called the Military Religious Freedom Foundation. And he usurped and infringed on the rights of all the rest of his soldiers there.
When we were talking about this the other day, we quoted from, I think it was the Todd Starnes column, where you said this is just another reminder of the incredible discrimination against Christians in our armed forces. And when we've had Kelly Shackelford in here, or Michael Berry, or others that have spent time talking about and even trying to litigate some of these cases, it is becoming more and more difficult, isn't it, General Boykin, for a Christian to express his or her faith inside the military?
That's exactly right. And by the way, Kelly Shackelford and Michael Berry and the First Liberty Institute are just heroes. They are champions. They've defended the rights of servicemen and women, especially chaplains, and done such an incredible job. But today, we are seeing a military where our service members are forced to accept freedom of worship versus freedom of religion.
Yes.
They are not able to express their faith, live their faith, or do anything that comports with the tenets of their faith except worship inside the chapel or inside their homes.
You know, I teach at a seminary, and a number of our students over the years have gone into the chaplaincy, which I think is a very high calling. But I think it's becoming even more difficult for chaplains who ostensibly are supposed to be speaking religious ideas in the military. What have you found?
Well, that's exactly right. And Michael Berry defended Chaplain Wes Motter,
yes,
who was relieved for having and expressing a Christian biblical worldview with regards to marriage. And he was relieved of his duties as a result of that. And he wasn't out in public. This was in private counseling. And he was considered to be intolerant and bigoted, and he was relieved of his duties and also told that he needed to show cause, which is a military term meaning you need to tell us why you should even be able to stay in the military. And he was told to show cause. Now, he was, First Liberty Institute helped him to win that case, but he is only one example of the kind of pressures that chaplains are under today to either not talk about their faith or to alter their views and their orations to include from the pulpit. And that is not what the First Amendment is about, and it certainly should not be what we expect in our military today, where faith is a very important component for many. In fact, I would say most of the young men and women serving. Faith is a very important component, especially with a military that's been at war since 2001.
I might just mention, too, that there are two pressures I think, for example, the commanders at Fort Riley and other places are facing. One is from the radical secularists, the atheists, the Mikey Weinsteins. But you also talk about the pressure that comes from the commander-in-chief, who you say is really trying to impose a politically correct culture on the military. Explain.
Well, if you look at what we have today in terms of leadership in our military, what you will find is that many of them are in these positions because they understand political correctness, and they're willing to play that game. Rather than being focused on military readiness and fighting and winning the nation's wars, which is the single mission of our military, they are looking now at careerism. In order to get to the top now, you have to be politically correct. You cannot step outside of the bounds that this administration has established for political correctness. You've got to be willing to support the Obama agenda. And the reality is that, the first obligation is to the Constitution. Every person serving in the military has taken an oath to that Constitution. And I will tell you that the commander at Fort Riley violated, I think, his oath by infringing on the constitutional rights, especially the First Amendment rights,
of his soldiers, and that was done in the name of political correctness.
Wow. Let me just give our listeners some action items. We have very activist individuals, and first of all, we have a link to your website. That is Family Research Council, frc.org, and a link actually to your bio. I would encourage some to consider scheduling you to speak. If Fort Riley's loss might be someone else's gain, that would be one. We've also posted a couple of things. A couple of days ago, we posted Todd Starnes' commentary. My commentary will be out shortly that people can get. And we also have an interview with you at Fox News, and I'm encouraging people to maybe click that share button, put it on their Facebook page, send it to someone else, start a conversation, because this is something that deserves a lot more attention. That's why we wanted to do so. But General Boykin, just before we let you go, anything else that you might recommend? Because I do think that they need to support what you're doing there at the Family Research Council. They need to support their military, and they need to maybe even ask their elected officials what they think about some of these issues.
Well, I think that's exactly what they need to do. Look, people say, well, they don't hear me yes, they do. And, the most effective way is call their office. Call your elected representative, either your local congressman or your senator, both of your senators for your state. Call their office. Tell them how you feel. Tell them that you want the rights of military people to be protected, their First Amendment rights. Just tell them that. They'll get it. They'll get the message. You want it protected. And that has an impact. I can tell you, because I work with these people every day, when their phone lines are flooded with people saying, we want our military people's rights protected, it does have an impact on them, and it has an impact on how they vote on legislation like the annual defense budget, which is called the Defense Authorization Act.
Right.
And it does make a difference.
Well, again, this is not the first time that we've seen military leaders frightened by a few anti-Christian activists, and thus, I think in this case, denied Christian soldiers an opportunity to hear from one of Army's most decorated heroes. But I do have a question. If they balk at a threat from one individual like Mikey Weinstein, how do we expect them to respond to the threats around the world?
Well, I've said that repeatedly. If you can't fight a battle like this, if you can't stand up to one guy who is, and frankly, his whole organization, as far as I'm concerned, is a hoax. All the money that goes into that organization from donors, and in fact, many of them are well-meaning donors, most of that money goes into the Mikey Weinstein's pocket, and that was proven in an expose about a year and a half ago that most of that money goes into his pocket. This is a hoax. And commanders don't have the courage. So how are they going to fight a determined enemy? And the Big Red One has such a distinguished combat record.
Sure does.
It leaves you wondering, how on earth can you expect to face the real enemies of America if you can't stand up to an organization like this?
Well, I'm glad you're standing up. General Boykin, always a delight to have you on the program. Let's do it again sometime.
I would love to be on again. God bless you.
We're going to take a break, and when we do so, let me just mention, we'll take some of your phone calls. Perhaps some of you have some comments about what's happening in the military. Of course, I'd love to hear from some of you about who you think you might vote for president. Don't forget, we also have an opportunity for you to stand for truth and to help us financially. It's all available on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
I had what many would call the Cadillac of insurance plans with my company. It covered everything, and that's what got us started thinking, well, what is everything? Are we indirectly paying for people to use services that we don't believe in or want to be a part of? And MediShare was the perfect answer for that.
I felt such relief switching over to MediShare. I wasn't paying for anything that I didn't believe in. I was actually able to stand up for what I believe in, and I was able to put my money where my faith is.
We're part of this great program, and it really costs us less than insurance.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your health care. For your free information guide, call 855-BIBLE-11. Not available in Montana. MediShare, affordable biblical health care. Call 855-BIBLE-11. That's 855-BIBLE-11.
Point of View Radio needs you in 2016. Join today at pointofview.net. Become a monthly partner. Pointofview.net. Or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
If you'd like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Open line for the next half hour, and then we're going to get into some other in-studio interviews, but did want to give some of you a chance to express your opinion about who you might vote for in the next campaign. Of course, we just had an interview with Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, and again, very sad story of the big red one up there in Kansas. Again, hard to believe Fort Riley just disinvited him because he was going to give a Christian message, and that might be just too much. I want to get some of your comments, though, as we go along here. So if you have comments about the military, have comments about the political campaigns, and many other issues, we'll certainly take those phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. Let's head first to Illinois, WPEO. Betty, thank you for calling today.
I want to know how they justify putting a Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence in prison for 20 years for telling his fellow soldiers to protect themselves and use Afghanistan, yet the Obama administration can let these prisoners in Gitmo go free, and all these other people come in, there's ISIS and all these illegals come in and kill our people. How do they justify this?
Yeah, you got two issues. Let me take the first one, and that is we have the story that we've talked about before of Charles Martland. He was actually seen that there was an Afghan commander who was sexually abusing a boy. Now, the argument from the Army was, well, that is, just the culture. And I say, no, that's not the culture. That's sex abuse. And he stopped the individual from doing it. I guess it'd be fair to say, he kind of beat the daylights out of him. And, of course, this individual who was trying to prevent a young boy from being sexually assaulted, sodomized, I guess is the actual technical term, by this Afghan commander, faced court-martial and time in jail. So then the next thing, as you point out, is that then you have this president releasing terrorists because he wants to get rid of Guantanamo. That was one of his campaign pledges, and he's recognizing that the only way to do that is to let all of these terrorists out. And, of course, we have found time and time again that when those terrorists have been released from Gitmo, from Guantanamo, they end up almost always back on the battlefield killing Americans or other allied forces. And so you just shake your head. It's a good example of what we talk about in Isaiah 5 of calling good evil and evil good. And even later it talks about those who are innocent going to prison and those who are corrupt going free. The people that should be in prison are being let free, and the people that have stood for righteousness and what is right find themselves in prison. It's just the most bizarre set of circumstances you could have ever imagined. But I'll let you get the last word in there.
It's the way the Bible said. Good will be bad and bad will be good. It's just the way it is. I mean, I'm scared to vote for a president, and I know we're supposed to vote.
Well, I appreciate you calling and reminding us of that. A while back when we actually had Alan West in studio, we told the story of Charles Napier, and I thought I'd come back to that because I did it in a commentary a while back because it illustrates how far we've come. And if you're not familiar with the story of him, it is, I think, very relatable to the conversation we just had a minute ago with Betty, and I'll go back and take some more phone calls. Charles Napier was the general at that time, and he was a British commander in colonial India. And he's probably best known for his response to the Hindu priests because they complained to him about the British prohibition against burning widows alive on the funeral pyre of their husbands. I mean, if you can believe that, that's what would happen. In other words, you would have, as the husband died, these widows, in many cases, would be thrown on the pyre and burned to death as well. Sometimes they threw themselves, but most of the time they were forced to do so. And so his brother, William Napier, reported what actually Charles Napier said, and this is a direct quote. He said, "This burning of widows is your custom. Prepare the funeral pile. But my nation also has a custom. When men burn women alive, we hang them and confiscate all their property. My carpenters shall therefore elect a gallows upon which to hang all concerned when the widow is consumed. Let us all act according to our national customs." And basically, you see, he didn't play around. And we have the Army today telling people that have served in Afghanistan that, well, it's just part of that culture for older men to abuse younger boys. And because Charles Martland said, I'm not going to do that, we find that very clear. And so if nothing else, this is a good example of what we need in the military right now. even if the military has ordered them to turn a blind eye to that Afghan culture, we need to stand for what is right. So, again, Betty, thank you for that reminder, and be praying for Charles Martland, and we'll probably follow that story again in the future. But let's go back to the phones. We'll head to Texas this time, KBDR. And Carolyn, what would you like to add to our conversation?
I apologize for my voice, but I would like to get the message to President Obama. The next time he gets on an apology tour, he needs to apologize to America for what he's done to us.
You know, I saw somebody the other day that said that the Hillary Clinton campaign is going to be one of those where she'll basically have to say, I'm going to try to right the wrongs that I created when I was Secretary of State. And again, the same point you're making here, the president making an apology tour, and at the same time might want to apologize to America for some of the things that have happened. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212, and we'll take some more calls in just a minute. But I thought I'd give you an update on a couple of stories. One of my greatest frustrations sometimes with even local news is they'll tell you a story, but they never finish the story. And this is one of those stories that I thought you'd like to know a little bit more about. We've all talked about over the last couple of weeks Target and the boycott. Well, there was a shareholders meeting yesterday, and I want to get on the program some of the individuals that showed up, because you had the National Center for Public Policy Research that showed up. You had people from the American Family Association showing up, and they basically, at the annual shareholders meeting, wanted to ask a couple of questions, and that is, if indeed you think your policy makes a lot of sense when, at the moment, American Family Association has 1.3 million signatures of individuals who say they're going to boycott your stores. More importantly, they wanted to also ask, why did it seem to Target that it was really important for them to get involved in one of these public policy wars, one of which, of course, has to do with whether or not to allow men who perceive themselves as being women to go into the women's restroom, but not just the restroom, but the changing rooms and all of the rest. And then why, in light of the fact that now we have some of these stories of individuals who have used these policies to actually abuse individuals, did they not want to change their policy? So again, we wanted to see if we could find out a little bit more from some of those people that attended the shareholder meeting yesterday, which I think would have been an interesting one if you could have put press and cameras in to see some of those questions being asked. So I thought I'd give you an update. Not only has Target's stock dropped by 18%, not only has the petition boycott now up to almost 1.3 million signatures, but there were no doubt some very tough questions asked yesterday at the shareholders meeting of Target. Let's take another phone call if we can real quickly. We'll go to North Carolina this time. Kevin, what would you like to add to our conversation?
Well, I would like to remind Americans who think that what the Afghani men are doing to sodomize those boys is a sin against humanity, and that when the Germans thought that culturally, in their culture, it was correct to kill the Jews, we stepped in and stopped that, and this is no different.
Well said, well said. And again, I appreciate her reminding us of that. We'll get back to that story and give you an update. But again, I appreciate just looking at the contrast, letting prisoners go who should stay in prison. And here's another one. We're coming now, of course, to the 15th anniversary of 9/11. And Sheikh Mohammed is still in the Guantanamo. So you've got all these different leaders of even the 9/11 attack, and yet we're still finding that some of them have never actually had their day in court, and some of them actually have been released by the president. And then on the other hand, you have individuals standing up for right, and they actually go to prison. So, Kevin, thank you for that one. That was a good illustration. And we need to take a break. We will come back and focus a little bit more on a couple of other phone calls if you'd like to join us. Also, I want to point to one of the articles we've posted. Did the Never Trump Ever Have to Happen? That was a good piece by Don McLaughlin. We'll talk about that. But we'll also take some more of your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back with more right after these important messages. Stay tuned.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. When I was talking to Kevin just a minute, I got sometimes our words mixed up. It's Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Anyway, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed has been in prison in Guantanamo almost 10 years. This is coming up on the 15th anniversary of 9/11. And if you think justice moves slowly, look at that particular issue and look, of course, at the fact that this president wants to clear out Guantanamo. I'm not sure what he's going to do with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and some of the others responsible for 9/11, but there is a good illustration, as we pointed out just a minute ago, of how guilty people are going free and innocent ones sometimes go to prison. Let's go back to the phones. I mentioned a little bit about the Target interestingly enough, annual shareholder meeting yesterday. We're going to do our best to try to talk to a few people at the meeting, but I wanted to let you know that they're feeling a little pressure. But Perry wants to update us on some stories. So Perry in Texas, KBJS, thank you for calling. What would you like to add?
Yes, I was shopping in Tyler, Texas today, and I went to Lowe's, and they've got only one bathroom for both men and women.
You got to be kidding me. Really? Just one?
Yeah,
what did they do, close the other one down, put a tape over it? What did they do?
It was just a closed, locked door now.
Wow. This
and
is
that's
amazing.
Lowe's in Tyler, Texas. I don't know if they're all doing that or what the deal is, but I turn around and left the store.
Wow. So that's in Lowe's in Tyler, Texas. And
Yes, sir.
I'll see if we can find out a few others. Perry, thank you for being our eyes and ears. I have not heard that one. And that's just another example of some of the insanity. We talked just a minute, of course, about letting guilty people and terrorists free from Guantanamo and yet putting in a decorated Green Beret soldier in jail for actually protecting a young boy from an Afghan commander that wanted to sodomize him. But here's another one where we say, well, we can't figure out whether or not we should have men's bathrooms and boys' bathrooms and girls' bathrooms and women's bathrooms. I know, we'll just have one and just let everybody use the same one or whatever. Who knows what they're even coming up with. So again, that relates back to what took place yesterday. The retail chain Target held its annual shareholder meeting. Was a little bit contentious because, after all, when your stock has dropped by, 18%, put that on your next blog or Facebook post, and now the boycott petition from the American Family Association has reached 1.3 million people signing it. Oh, boy. Pretty amazing stuff. And since we mentioned Target, I was going to get into some other issues, but let's take some more of those calls on that first. So we'll go to South Carolina, WAPB. Nancy, thank you for calling today.
No, it's WAGP. But anyway,
sorry.
It's okay. I was on Facebook the other day, and I saw that Target had a clothing line called Pride, and it was for children. It's all the rainbow colors. And it has to do, obviously, with the LGBT movement. And I tried to verify it. I thought it was fake, and then I thought, well, let me just go to Target.com, and I did. And they, in fact, are now selling a clothing line called Pride, and it is geared towards children, and it's all the rainbow colors. So, I mean, they have really taken it up. I mean, it's not just the bathroom. They certainly twisted the world around. So I just wondered if anybody else had heard that or seen the line.
Well, between you and Perry, I think we've all of a sudden begun to realize that we need to probably just go out there and check out all these retail stores and construction agencies and all the rest and service stations and who knows what all, just to begin to figure out what is happening. But Nancy, again, if you'd told me that like 5 years ago, I'd say you're probably looking at one of these fake websites like The Onion. Nah, there's no way a major retailer would put this in the face of their consumers, because who is the most likely consumer for Target? Well, it's probably a mom with her kids. And already mom's saying, I'm not sure I want to let my kids go either to the bathroom or even to the dressing room because I don't know what might be in there. And then to have something that really is in your face with your Pride clothes. Do they just have a death wish? I mean, do they really just want to go bankrupt? I don't understand any of this, but
no, I don't either. We're just living in such an evil world, and I am by far not a homophobe. I know several people of that persuasion, and I love them dearly. My heart just breaks for them because I know what they're, where they're going to end up for eternity. But I'm telling you, it's unbelievable. If my father were here, I can just hear him. It would be unbelievable. But anyway, I just wanted to let you know and see if anybody else had seen that.
Well, again, I've still got a couple of the calls here. So, Nancy, again, like I said to Perry, I'll say it to you, Nancy, thank you for being our eyes and ears, because we find out some of these trends from some of our listeners. And I used to say, and I haven't said this in a long time, but I used to say that Point of View basically has as many correspondents and reporters as we have listeners, because so many times I have had an idea for a program because of an email that we received or because of something somebody has said on the air. And so, again, thank you for helping us understand what is actually going on out there in the community. So let's, if we can, see if we can take one more phone call before we have the top of the hour break. And so I'll go to North Carolina this time. And Sandy, what have you found?
Hi. Thank you for taking my call. First-time listener, and I'm already loving your show. If you would, please announce if you have a website or a Facebook or something. What I wanted to say is, number one, I'm from North Carolina where all this mess kind of started, and that makes us feel kind of bad. But I'm not ever been one that ticketed or put signs up or rallied or any of that. I mean, certainly I can boycott, and I have Target because I have 2 little grandchildren, both girls, about 4 years old. But I think it's wonderful that God's people put their money where their mouth was. Because if money and financial gain is the only thing to move these businesses in the right direction, then at least we're using that. But I know that I have tried to. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say one of the things we say around here so often is that if they won't see the light, maybe they'll feel the heat. So go ahead.
Yeah, I have tried to because, like I said, I'm not brave enough to get out there on the forefront. But to remind God's people that we are, first of all, called to be intercessors. And we can pray. If we hear something on the news or read something on Facebook, pray. Go to God. If He calls you to do something, do it. If not, just consider to intercede. And that's worked for me.
Very good. Well, as a first-time listener, take the time, if you can, to go to our website, pointofview.net. You're going to find all the articles there, some of the documentation, because sometimes, Sandy, when you go and share something like we've just talked about with your friends, I go, really? Are you sure about that? And, of course, we have all the footnotes necessary so that you can be forearmed and equipped and empowered.
Can I ask you to do one other thing? And I don't know if you've read this story. I know it's blown up on Facebook, and it's really concerned my heart. Is the rape issue at Stanford and the colleges and the excuse of this father and the excuse of the university and the excuse of this judge and everybody passing the buck and responsibility to someone else. If we could find a political party, whether it's the Tea Party, whether it's Republicans, we know it's not the Democrats, that is the party of personal responsibility. You are responsible, whether it's one night of drunkenness or whatever, then that's the party I'd vote for.
Very
and
good.
Petition for, and maybe even hold sign.
Well, again, you brought up another issue that we probably will have a chance to get to, maybe even tomorrow in our Friday weekend edition. But for those of you not familiar, an individual that was raped by a fairly prominent individual who was on the Stanford swim team, who actually had some Olympic hopes. And then because he was so notable and raped this woman while she was unconscious, the judge gave a very light sentence. This rapist could have gone away for years. Instead, is going away for months. And now they've even cut some of that. And so there are even petitions now to remove that judge. And it kind of relates to another judge that Donald Trump was talking about. But we'll get that to maybe on our Friday weekend edition. Just before we take a break, though, if you find yourself today learning some things you've not heard before, that's a good reason to support this ministry. And we have a banner there. Will you stand up for truth? Give now. And between now and the end of our fiscal year, June 30th, we certainly would love to hear from you. And we have a matching fund. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Did you know there's an approved healthcare choice just for Christians that's founded on the timeless principles in God's Word? It's not insurance. It's MediShare. Over 189,000 believers across America who love God and share each other's healthcare bills. It's about half the cost of health insurance, and you never pay for medical practices that go against your Christian beliefs. Best of all, the healthcare law includes a special provision for MediShare members, so you don't have to buy insurance or face penalties. MediShare is affordable healthcare without compromise.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your health care. For your free information guide, call 855-BIBLE-11. Not available in Montana. MediShare, affordable biblical health care. Call 855-BIBLE-11. That's 855-BIBLE-11.
Cast your vote today for Point of View Radio. Please become a monthly partner at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Second hour, we're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about intelligent design, and I think this is going to be a real encouragement to you, and also talk about some resources that would be helpful not only for you, but for your children and grandchildren to learn a little bit more about God's creation. And we are privileged to have in studio with us today Dr. Dennis Lindsey. He's the president of Christ for the Nations, which is a worldwide missions organization and Bible Institute. More than 40,000 students have been trained just in the Dallas campus alone. It was started by Gordon Lindsey and Frida Lindsey, who I knew very well. And, of course, Dennis is with us now. He earned his master's degree in practical theology, his doctorate in ministry from Oral Roberts University, and has been running the organization for some time. So, Dennis, thank you so very much for being in the program and the studio with us as well today. You know, when you talk about Christ for the Nations, some of our listeners, maybe that are hearing this in Dallas, will say, okay, I know about that. But most of our listeners will say, I've never even heard of that Bible Institute, and yet you've had a profound impact on the body of Christ. Talk a little bit about its history and what has been taking place over these years.
Well, it began back in 1948 when my dad was called out of Oregon, where I was born. He was pastoring there, and he got a call to go to a foreign country. It's where they speak a foreign language, and he moved to Texas, and that's where I was raised and been here all my life. And it started out in the healing crusades, just kind of following and reporting on the different miracles and the blessings of the Lord during the 40s and the 50s. And in the 60s, it became a missions ministry in helping national ministers and pastors overseas with churches and roofs for those buildings. And now we complete one church somewhere in the world about every 33 hours to the tune of about 14,000 since that program. And literature, my dad started a printing company. He sold 4 houses. The first one was to start the ministry. The second one was to start the printing company. The third one was to start these native churches. And the fourth one was our institute in 1970. So those are the 4 times the Lord told my dad to step out of his boat of comfort and to trust him, and he'll teach him to walk on water. And each of those 4 areas are still going on today. My brother, I just talked to him this morning. Would you believe he's on Jimmy Swaggart's program because he prints Bibles by the millions for Jimmy Swaggart all over the world. And he's got a printing company over in the former Soviet Union printing Bibles. So that's the Christ for the Nations in a nutshell.
Well, it is amazing, too, when you realize that so much has happened in terms of no longer an iron curtain and no longer situation in which you had to sneak Bibles in. One of our staff members years ago was an individual that used to be with Brother Andrew, and what they had to do to try to get Bibles into the Soviet Union. Now they're printing them over there as well. But you've also seen the real importance of staying true to the Word of God. I mean, in some respects, that's one of the hallmarks of Christ for the Nations, and it has been something very important. And you are aware, as well as probably anybody, that one of the big attacks is on this issue of creation versus evolution. And so I know that's one of the reasons why you've written some of these books, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, I think back to when I always had a passion for science. Dad gave me, when he wrote his autobiography, he actually says, when the Lord was going to lead me in a new direction, kind of the supernatural ministry, says I had to give up some things that I loved, which was science. And I never knew that until a couple of years ago. I read that for the first time in his autobiography. And now I can see how it's passed on to me, because I was up in New York City a few years ago. My wife said, let's go out for a musical. And I says, okay. So she gets tickets, but then she gets an opportunity to be on Glenn Beck and said, you'll have to go to the musical yourself. And I said, okay. So I went there, and she came in at the break. And for the last 45 minutes, She doesn't know what's going on. I have to explain every detail. I walked out of there and I said, what in the world, I enjoyed it. It was a fantastic musical. But then the Lord showed me, Dennis, when you were raised here in Dallas, in the public school system, I had prayer and Bible reading every morning in our public school.
Very true. Yeah.
It's gone.
Yeah.
So you can't start like you're used to doing, asking people, what would happen if you died? Because I saw John F. Kennedy just before he was assassinated here, and I saw him just after he was assassinated. I was in Parkland Hospital. They asked me for blood for the president, and so I was happy to be at the right place at the right time. And I used to say, what would happen if you suddenly died like this, sharing this story? You can't do that anymore. You can't start with John 3:16. You can't start in the middle of the Bible. You have to start at the beginning of the Bible. Who God is, what are his requirements, what will happen if you break those. So now I understand you got to start at the beginning of the Bible, and that's why creation is a vital part in teaching.
I was just thinking about that because just a few weeks ago I was in Greece, and it's the first time I've ever been there. We went to Israel and Greece, and we had a point of view tour, and I'm at Mars Hill. And so I'm looking at, this is where Paul preached Acts 17. But if you do a comparison, Dennis, between Acts 13, where Paul is in the synagogue, compared to Acts 17, where he's speaking to the Stoic and Epicurean philosophers, you see a different message. And the message is different because in Acts 13, what can he assume? Well, they believed in God, they believed in the Old Testament, they knew about a coming Messiah, so he can kind of hit the ground running. But when you go to Acts 17, they don't even know what he means. They say Jesus and resurrection. They're talking about two new gods. They think the word resurrection means God. I mean, you talk about, as my teenage daughters like to say, somebody who is clueless.
Yes.
They are clueless. So you have to back up.
Right.
And it seems to me that what you're saying is our culture is more of an Acts 17 kind of culture than it is an Acts 13 culture, isn't it?
And especially if you go overseas, where they don't even have any reference to God hardly at all, if they're raised in a communist country or whatever. Pagan country. So you got to start at the beginning.
Well, we are going to be talking today about two books. So actually, there's a couple others, but two that we have on our website, and also a link to Christ for the Nations. And it's Nature Speaks of Intelligent Design, Volume 1. And that looks at the mammals and the birds and some of the aquatic creatures and things like that. And then Nature Speaks of Intelligent Design, Volume 2, which deals with the plants and insects and some of the microbes. And fascinating because, number one, I don't care how much science background you have, and I do have a couple science degrees, there's still things I'm learning in here, but it's written in such a way that if you got your kids, then they love critters at this age, don't they? They're interested in dinosaurs, certainly they're interested in bugs, they're interested in their dogs and cats. This is a way to really teach creation, and I think that's one of the reasons you wrote those.
Yeah, I just have a passion for this, and when I asked a number of years ago, I was with a gentleman who was a scientist, and he was a creationist. And I believed in an old earth theory. I don't know what the people believe here, but I was an old earth theory too. And he just says, well, Dennis, what are you going to do with the Bible? And I says, what do you mean? He says, well, if the record of the rocks tells us that thorns and death and decay and disease has been around for millions of years, which is the evolutionary humanistic theory, then we got a problem. When did Adam and Eve actually sin that caused physical death? Did physical death begin with Adam and Eve? If so, that couldn't have been millions and billions of years ago. It had to be more recent. I began to study radiometric dating, and I saw it was built on a foundation that does not exist. And so my whole life has changed dramatically on that issue, and now I'm a young earth creationist. Not everybody's a young earth Christian. When we get to heaven, we'll all figure it out. But meanwhile, I've moved to become a young earth creationist.
Well, let me just mention that this is a good time for especially some of your kids, if they're out and about. You might get them next to the radio here. We're going to talk about some of those critters they all love and learn maybe a little bit more about some of the amazing things that these animals can do. If you talk about how fast they can run, how long they can swim, how deep they can dive, you realize that we're pretty weak in the animal kingdom because we were made for something else. But we can learn some very interesting things, which all point back to what? An intelligent design. That would imply there might have been an intelligent designer. We'll talk more about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Last month, Nicholas Kristof stirred the political waters when he wrote an op-ed with the title A Confession of Liberal Intolerance. The response to his piece led to a second one with the title The Liberal Blind Spot. He began his first piece by acknowledging that we progressives believe in diversity and want women, blacks, Latinos, gays, and Muslims at the table so as long as they aren't conservatives. He concludes the liberals are fine with people who don't look like them as long as they think like them. He quotes from Professor George Yancey, who is a sociologist who is also a black evangelical. Yancey, who's been on my radio program, says that he's faced some problems as a black outside of academia, but faced many more problems inside academia because he was a Christian. Nicholas Kristof seemed appalled at the response to his first op-ed, hence the reason for his second commentary. Liberals have written that much of the conservative worldview consists of ideas that are known to be empirically to be false. Another asked facetiously, how about we make faculties more diverse by hiring idiots? Although he gives good examples of outstanding people in various fields that are evangelicals, his liberal friends will have none of it. That is why he is calling on his readers to begin to tackle their liberal blind spot. He cites a survey that shows that a majority of academics in some fields would discriminate against a job seeker that was an evangelical. He says that feels like bigotry. Part of the problem may be that liberals are isolated and don't know any evangelicals. He reminds us of surveys that show Americans have negative views of Muslims when they don't know any. He says that he suspects that many liberals disdain evangelicals in part because they don't have any evangelical friends. I applaud Nicholas Kristof for his observations. Sadly, I doubt that it will have much of an impact on the millions of closed-minded liberals. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have in studio with us today Dr. Dennis Lindsey, and again, he is the president of Christ for the Nations, and talking about a couple of new books, Nature Speaks of Intelligent Design, God's Wonders of Creation, Mammals, Birds, Aquatic Creatures in Volume 1, and then God's Wonders of Creation, Plants, Insects, and Microbes in Volume 2. This is just a great way, I would think, Dennis, to teach the wonders of creation. But let's talk about this for just a minute. Early part in your first volume, you talk about the Animal Olympics. And I knew some of this, but it was just fun to have the evidence of who are the fastest runners, the fastest flyers, the deepest divers, and things of that nature of the animal kingdom. And that's pretty fascinating, isn't it?
Well, I'm amazed, too, when you look at God's entire creation. The more you study it, the more you become amazed at what kind of a God we serve. His creativity knows no limits. And the more you study each little animal, even though it doesn't look like much on the outside, when you begin to study a little bit about its eyesight and its hearing sight, it's pretty amazing.
Well, again, when we talk about let's talk about birds, because I know that one of the ones that you talk about is the plover. And that's an interesting one because I know even more recently they've done some films on flight to try to explain whether it's butterflies or birds, how they can travel such long distances, and they don't have a GPS or an iPhone under their wings. So how do they do this?
Well, again, the evidence has to be there must be some intelligent design behind this whole system, because if you look at the Pacific golden plover, which it has a neat little living arrangement. It raises its young up in Alaska, and then it winters over in Hawaii. And twice a year it makes the flight, and they say it takes about 90 hours. Well, they've examined how much baby fat or how much fat, it must have for fuel. And they say it needs a fuel enough for about 90-hour flight. That's what it takes on. But the thing is, it only takes on 70 hours of fuel. But it always makes a distance, and it's always usually 10 ounces or whatever you want to call it, baby fat left over. So how does it do it? Because it doesn't have enough fuel. It doesn't eat anything along the way. There's no restaurants. It doesn't go fishing. And so they're questioning what's going on. Well, one of the things the Lord downloaded in its little tiny brain is to fly in V formation. And we know about V formation. That lead bird helps to cut the draft for all those birds behind it, so that the birds behind it are saving energy. In fact, they've even found that the wings are floating like on a wave from the lead bird. A wave like surfers are surfing on a wave. So they get that extra little push. They're saving fuel. When that lead bird gets tired, it drops to the back, and the next one takes the lead for a while. But after 90 hours, it saves actually 10 hours in case there's strong headwinds or a little bit of contrary of storm. That they still get to Hawaii. And one day I was sitting there at the hotel, and right there in front of me comes a little Pacific golden plover. It made it. Now, what's really interesting is its young do not fly with the parents. They're not old enough. They'd have to have a couple more weeks to develop. And so finally, after 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, all the little baby chicks says it's time to go to Hawaii, and they fly for the first time together in V formation. But no one was there to show them the way. And their little tiny brain is smaller than a pea, and somehow it's locked into the direction that they must fly. If they're off even a fraction of a degree,
that's right,
they'll miss the islands and they'll land in the ocean and become extinct. So where did they get the information downloaded to be able to make that journey with no GPS example? So that is a miracle that suggests that there is a designer behind the design of this creature.
You know, this video that's come out, and it's done by another company, but it's about flight. It also shows these butterflies, and there you have no brain at all, and yet it turns out that through the magnetic cores and the magnetic field, they are able to direct themselves. But again, just think about if you were to fly an airplane from Alaska to Hawaii, and like you said, if you're off by a fraction of a percent of a particular degree, you miss, because there aren't those islands are not that big, and you could miss it and pass by them and never even know that you missed them. And to recognize that these birds do this is just, again, one of those great wonders of creation, isn't it?
Wonders of our Lord. That's right.
You know, again, when you talk about some of these Olympics here, the long jumpers and some of the sprinters, we have some animals that run very fast. We have some birds that fly very fast. And we also have in the ocean all sorts of whales that not only swim very fast, but dive very deep. And so we're talking about some pretty unusual creatures that actually are on the planet. And because of that, again, you have to wonder what kind of adaptations that the animal world has, because some of them can do things that we can't even do with our mechanical machines, and yet they have been doing this ever since God created them.
There's one little creature that I just stumbled on just maybe a few months ago called the pistol shrimp.
Oh, yes, let's talk about that one.
And it's an amazing little creature. It's not very big, but when it needs to defend itself, it shoots out a bubble, and it's a stun gun. It's like a stun gun, and when it hits its prey, it stuns the guy, and so if it's too small, if it's dinner, he'll go over and eat it. If he's just trying to get away, he's safe. But then they measured what actually happens. When he shoots out the bubble, it travels at 60 miles an hour, they tell you. And you can go on YouTube and watch this.
Yes.
Okay? But here's the amazing thing. It's when the bubble explodes and hits the guy, it creates a sound. And so they've monitored the sound, they've actually recorded it, and they found out it is louder than anything that man has ever created. It's louder than a jackhammer, it's louder than a chainsaw, it's louder than a space shuttle takeoff, it's louder than anything man has ever created, over 200 megahertz. And that is unbelievably loud. So how does that little bubble, that's a stun, produce that? But that's even not as interesting as one of the most amazing thing is when that bubble explodes, it produces a heat, and they've monitored and how much heat comes off of that? Would you believe it is hotter than the surface of the sun, over 10,000 degrees? And it's just very small, but it's still, how could a little creature like that produce such energy and an explosion to stun his enemy? Only God could have come up with something like that in such a small little creature.
Well, we're talking about bugs. Let's do one more on the bombardier beetle. And that one's kind of interesting because this one actually provides something that has explosive gas. Now, the way this does this is that you have hydroquinone in one part of the beetle and hydrogen peroxide in the other. Now, you can imagine that if indeed evolution is true, there probably were a lot of blown up beetles, because if they didn't pull those together in the right order, you would have exploded beetle. And yet what you have here is something which, again, is almost like a dragon fire, if you will, that protects the beetle from all the kinds of predators. And that one, to me, again, is one of those many that seems to deny and really seem to fly in the face of your typical kind of evolutionary small incremental changes over a long period of time. Because if nature is blind and if evolution is blind, how would this have ever been developed in the first place?
Well, that and many others. When I teach a class on creation science with my students, and the first question I ask them, I says, what's the first test in Scripture? And they usually say, well, Adam and Eve in the garden, the fruit. And I say, no, there's one before that. What is it? In the beginning, God. You have to start with God, and there's no way to prove him from a scientific standpoint. And then he says, and he created everything out of absolutely nothing. That is a test that you have to accept. You cannot test it, but from a scientific standpoint, you have to believe it. Now, if it's a word of God, he's going to confirm it in time. But there you have to come with faith. He says, unless you believe that I exist, I'm not going to reveal myself to you. So I say, students, if you can get past that, you will not have any problem with any other miracle that you come across in creation or in the rest of the Bible. But that's the first test. God says, you must trust me. It is a integrity. It is the same thing as a marriage test. You've got to trust. And so that's what I tell the students when it comes to miracles, and you're going to see miracles like this, like the bombardier beetle. You have to trust that there is a God. Now, the only alternative, this is what I say, students, what's the alternative? And the alternative is, in the beginning, there was absolutely nothing. And absolutely nothing exploded for no reason whatsoever and became absolutely everything for no reason whatsoever. Can you test that from a scientific standpoint? Absolutely not. It's a faith issue. The real issue is not the evidences. The issue is a heart issue. It is a issue between the humanistic heart or a humanistic religion versus the biblical religion. And one makes much more sense. It's a God.
Yeah. As Frank Turek and Norm Geisler's book says, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. So let's take a break. We're talking today with Dennis Lindsey. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about what's available at Christ for the Nations, also a little bit more from some of these books. But if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll continue our conversation and encourage you to visit our website, pointofview.net. That's where you'll find more information. We'll be right back.
I want you to be honest for a minute. 10 years ago, did you think the Supreme Court would ever dare to redefine marriage? That a president would threaten schools unless they permit males to shower with your daughters? Told hospitals they must do abortions and sex change procedures or lose federal money? Did you honestly foresee any of this? We must stand together today and defend our liberties, or in the next few years, the nation will be transformed in ways we can't imagine. Please, please, join Kirby and Point of View Radio and defend what's right. We have a June 30th deadline, the end of our fiscal year, and it's critical we finish this month on firm financial terms. Partner with us. Give the most generous gift you can, and right now, it will be doubled up to $10,000. Give online at pointofview.net. or call 1-800-347-5151. Thank you for standing with us to defend faith and family. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Dr. Dennis Lindsey in studio with us today as we spend some time talking about a number of his books. Nature Speaks of Intelligent Design, and in just a minute we'll get to the issue of giants, fallen angels, and the rise of the Nephilim. But I wanted to spend just a little bit of time before we get too far into the other books to talk about Christ for the Nations. We have a link to it at cfni.org, or you simply can follow the link. The latest issue of The Voice, which is a spring issue, has Wonders of God's Creation by Dennis Lindsey, as well as a number of other articles. But let's talk about some of the things that you're doing there right now. Obviously, you've been preparing students for ministry and missions for years. I know you're going to be building a museum and a few other things. So talk about all that is happening there at Christ for the Nations.
Well, I teach a couple of classes. One of the classes I taught of 20,000 students is discipleship. We try to get the Word of God and faith into all the students. We're a missions organization. That's the main reason that we are in existence, to get the students into the Word of God, get the missions of in other words, not just knowledge of the Word of God, but get practical experience. You've got to graduate by going out somewhere and putting it into practice in a short-term missions outreach. So we just finished all of the outreaches, and so that's what I've been doing. I went on Youth with a Mission, an organization that loves these kind of outreaches, and it was a life-changing experience. One summer I went to Jamaica for 6 weeks. I came back changed person. And I says, this has to be a part of Christ for the Nations. And so now we require the students, before you can graduate, you got to do some practical experience. And so we are a missions organization trying to get the students to get back to the world. We usually have somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30% of our students, and we usually have over 1,000 students, are internationals from like 50 to 60 different countries every year. So we are simply a missions Bible school. The whole purpose, we're building a museum, kind of the history of what the whole ministry is all about. It's a missions organization. I'm trying to explain in our little museum how Dad started these pillars. And we've got 12 basic pillars, kind of like Joshua and Moses. Moses says, now when you cross over the Jordan, be sure to pick up those stones when the next generation comes along, explain to them what these stones are about. And after I finished that, and that was part of my dissertation at Oral Roberts University, I said, do we have 12 stones? And I began to quickly go through, well, we got the Word, we're faith, we believe in the supernatural, we believe in missions, we believe in prayer and worship, giving and discipleship, teaching. These are integrity. Those are some of the things that we are. And so we're building this museum to explain what the missions of Christ for the Nations is all about. It is to promote missions, to bring back our Lord Jesus Christ.
Let's talk about some of the influence in your life. You and I share appreciation for Dr. Francis Schaeffer. You went to L'Abri. Of course, I'm with Probe Ministries, and it really, Dr. Schaeffer was the reason for Probe in many ways. And when we brought him 2 different times to Dallas to show the videos, certainly that was the case. But I know that you and your wife Ginger both spent some time over there at L'Abri with Dr. Schaeffer and Edith Schaeffer.
It really started right here with his program, Point of View. Marlon Maddox, years ago, I was raised in a church that was very outgiving, discipleship, that loved the Word, but there was really no discipleship in the area of apologetics. And so I started listening to Brother Marlon Maddox, and I said, man, I'm getting stuff here. So I go back many, many years with this ministry, and it's still going on today, and I'm thrilled. But then my wife and I, while we were in Youth with a Mission, had an opportunity to go to L'Abri over there in Switzerland. And being raised here in Texas, I often wondered, what in the world did the Lord think of when he created Texas? It's ugly when you go to Switzerland and see the Alps. And my little chateau that we stayed in, and the place where we studied along with Francis Schaeffer, was pretty amazing. And he was apologetics. I mean, all week long, apologetics. But on Sunday, he was a fiery, stormy preacher. And Ginger and I had to cook a meal for him every Friday in his little chalet. So that was a blessing. We got acquainted with him over a period of about 3 to 4 months. and we were blessed to learn apologetics while we were there.
That's amazing. You did mention Marlon Maddox. I know that the relationship that he had with your parents and with you over these years. I mean, when you were listening to Point of View when you were young, and we're getting kind of old now, aren't we?
Don't remind me.
But again, that was a very significant influence in your life as well, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. I'm blessed to look at my roots that I'm connected with. Those different ministries back then and how they guided me and how they steered me. And I look at them as like fathers of the ministry in my life.
Wow. Well, again, two of the books that we have on our website and our link to your website as well, Nature Speaks of Intelligent Design, Volume 1 and 2. But I thought before we run out of time, I want to talk about this book because it's a little different than some of the other things that you've written, Giants, Fallen Angels, and the Return of the Nephilim. Now, this is interesting because you're taking us back to some of the things that you see in Israel, some of the things that you see, evidence of supposedly giants in the land, questions about angels. This book has become real popular. I know when you've been on television programs, sometimes you're on the program for hours talking about this. We don't have that much time, but give us an overview of some of the things you cover in that book.
Well, the book was just simply the next creation book on giants. People were asking about giants. Well, what does the Bible really say about giants? So I started doing a study, and I really don't do so much with what the computer looks at bones, because you can Photoshop bones to make them look like giants. So I began to see that there's something else that testifies to giants on the planet Earth. Not just in the Bible. I deal with all those passages. I look at Time, the New York Times newspaper, and for 100 years, they documented giant bones all over the world, and especially here in the United States. But then in the late 50s or the 50s and the 60s, they disappeared because evolution was coming of age, and it didn't fit into the doctrine of humanism evolution. And so I began to study what evidence is there for giants. And we all know about a few places around the world, like Stonehenge of England. How did these ancient peoples carve and move and set up these stones? And I found in this, and I document these because you can visit these places both on web, and you can't Photoshop these places. You can visit them on site. You can go, you can fly and travel to these places and see these unbelievable megalithic structures. And so I document them, and I give the precise information about how amazing they are, which suggests there's something else going on when these things were built. They weren't built by Stone Age people. There had to be some sort of supernatural intelligence. And so I began to question, what was the intelligence back there? Did these people, were they Stone Age people, or were they receiving some sort of supernatural power or supernatural understanding? And I began to study about the fallen angels, and I began to see a connection there, because when you look at these places around the world, and there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them around the world, in every country, on all different continents. So I began to say, wow. And so I began to write about it. And then the second part of the book is all about the angelic creatures. But here's what the third part of the book is. Now that we have unraveled the DNA of the human being, and we understand all of the characteristics of these creatures that I've wrote about in my two intelligent design books, what is it going to be to persuade individuals to accept little genes from these animals, that we can implant them in a human being so that we can enhance the human being, the human man, like better sight, better hearing, better understanding, intelligence, better ways to be stronger, an athlete, a musician, and then to maybe to even live longer. And so that's what I do. The last part of the book, I document what's happening around the world in science and how the enemy is out to destroy God's plan of creation and his plan of redemption. And how can he do that? Jesus did not come to save Lucifer or Satan or the fallen angels. He came to save human beings. But if he can get human beings to do what was happening before the flood, something terrible was going on, that God had to wipe out the entire world, both animals as well. What was he doing? Was it something to do with hybrids? Half this, half that? We're making hybrids now with plants and vegetables and animals. Can Satan do that with us? Does Book of Revelation tell us to be careful? Don't be connected with the world system. And so that's what the last half of the book is, showing that Satan is out to deceive the entire world. How's he going to do that? He's going to do that, I believe, through genetic hybrids.
Yeah, and again, just an incredible book because it starts out with these megaliths. And again, a lot of people are familiar maybe with Stonehenge, but if they start reading your book, they realize, well, they're everywhere. They're in Bolivia and Peru and even in Ireland, and interesting enough, in Israel. And you have a sister that's in Israel that did not know there was a Stonehenge in Israel.
Nobody
right?
knows about it.
Isn't that amazing?
This is an area of 40,000 stones, up to 20 tons apiece, in 6 circles, 1.5 football fields in diameter, and she had never heard of it because it's off limits. It's not open to the public. I got permission with my little tour to be the first group that's ever visited that place. It's not open yet, but they're going to, because archaeologists and the Jewish archaeologists actually say that it had to be built by giants. And so this is what the book is all about, giants, showing the truth about giants.
Starts with giants and megaliths and ends up with genetic engineering. We'll take a break and talk a little bit more about that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Dr. Dennis Lindsey in studio with us today. We've talked a little bit about Nature Speaks of Intelligent Design. Been talking about the book Giants, Fallen Angels, and the Return of the Nephilim, the Giants of the Land. And we talked a little bit about one of the museums you have, which is the Heritage Museum. But I know you also have a museum for Earth history. Now, again, we all love what is happening right now with Answers in Genesis there in Kentucky, but for our listeners that are in the Dallas area, they'll be able to come to your museum. So talk more about what you have planned there.
Well, several years ago, there's an architect that was a student of ours from Mexico, and he had a love for creation as well. And he said, Dennis, we need a museum here. Well, even before that, there was a gentleman that goes around the country here in the United States and talks about creation, an older gentleman, and he came through Dallas, and he says, you ever thought about having a creation museum here? And I says, well, yeah, I love that, but we're a missions organization, and I'm the only one that really has a passion for creation. He says, well, let's walk around campus, and we were building a new mission center, and he walks in, and he sees this mural on creation, in the beginning, Genesis 1:1, and he says, this is the place. I said, no, this is a missions building. He says, no, you got to start with the biblical view of creation right at the beginning in missions. And I says, well, okay. And he walked into my racquetball court that I was building, and he says, oh, this will be wonderful for some big dinosaurs. And I said, no, this is my racquetball. Well, the dinosaurs won, and they are moved in. He donated over $1 million worth of dinosaurs. We started a number of years ago.
Amazing.
It's small. You know, it's only got 4 or 5 rooms, but the whole story is we're showing the evidence from a biblical perspective, a biblical worldview.
And that's available if some people are traveling through Dallas, or even people that live in Dallas listening to this want to go and see it. That would be very good. And, you know, one of the things I think about is most of the kids, at least certainly I notice that with my kids, especially my son, there comes a point in time they just love dinosaurs. And what a great time to teach creation. You know, it's kind of a delight-directed education. And so if they are really into dinosaurs, or as your books talk about, they're into some of these little critters, this is a great time to teach God's creation, isn't it?
Absolutely. That really, I mean, even big people like dinosaurs because they're big and mean. When you walk into our little museum, the first thing you see is a little T-Rex, or he's a pretty good size. He can kill you real quick if he was alive. Yeah. But that's what you see. We've been blessed, and we're hoping to finish it. Even though it's not finished, you can still come in and walk through and see all the different things. When it's completed, it will be pretty amazing. But we got so many things. We want the students to have a biblical view of creation, so when they go overseas, they'll be able to explain some of the basic things from the science, because every university is teaching an evolutionary humanistic point of view of how we arrived here. So what we're trying to do is give a few little answers, a few little things, insights to our students, so when they leave, even though they got the mission to change the hearts of people, they'll also have evidence to be able to share with people about creation.
Well, let me just, before I run out of time, talk about the last chapters of your book there, because, you know, I've written on genetic engineering, have a book on it, and, of course, chapters in one of the books I gave you. But that's a concern, because it's one thing to use genetic technology to treat and cure genetic diseases.
Yes.
But, and again, we could say that would be legitimate. That would be part of the Dominion Covenant, or the cultural mandate to go out and subdue the earth. And there's nothing wrong with curing disease.
That's good, yes.
But there are those who have an evolutionary point of view that look at this and say, well, certainly I can do a better job as an intelligent scientist in the laboratory than what nature has done through millions of years of chance evolutionary process. So once they accept the evolutionary idea, they can then begin to say, well, then we can just mix and match genetic material. We can, in a sense, rewrite the 5th and 6th days of creation. And isn't that exactly what some scientists want to do?
Yeah, the issue is not over the evidences. We all have exactly the same evidence. A couple of years ago, I had to go serve here in Dallas on the jury court. And I didn't want to go because it was right during my creation class, but they said if you aren't there, you're being in contempt of court, and you may go to jail and get a fine. So I went there, and while I'm sitting there, I'm listening to the person, the defending attorney and the prosecuting attorney, as they were trying to say. Now, the defending attorney gave his pedigree. Now, you can trust me. This is my past, and so all of these things that I just shared with you are very important to trust me when I share the evidence this way. And then the prosecuting attorney says, we have enough evidence against this person on drugs to sink a battleship. And he says, here's what he finally said. He says, so the evidence I present you understand, if you're selected to be on the jury, the evidence will determine the verdict. Does anybody have a problem? I raised my hand. And the judge looked at me, Mr. Lindsey, what's your problem? He said, the evidence will determine the verdict. I said, it's not the evidence. They both have the same evidence. It's their starting point, their worldview, and they will determine the evidence based on their worldview. If you have a sound, biblical, a non-changing worldview, you're going to interpret that different if you have a humanistic. Thank you, Mr. Lindsey. He interrupted me, wouldn't let me finish because he knew what I was saying is correct. They both have the same evidence.
Yeah.
but it's a worldview. And so what we're trying to do is show them in this museum a biblical worldview. It's not the evidence, it's your starting point.
Well, but again, that's why it's important to read some of these books and resources. Let's talk about what is available on your website, because we send people to cfni.org. Let's talk about what they find there. Or maybe we have some listeners out there that are saying, I'd love to get a biblical education. I'm thinking about missions, and I didn't even know there was such a place as Christ for the Nations. So find out, tell us what we'll find on the website.
Well, again, it's right here in Dallas, and we've been here now since 1970. It started out a very small school, and now it has usually over 1,000 students every semester, and it's all about missions. You can go on the web, and you can see what we're all about. You can sign up for it and come. And we have people from all over the world that come regularly. So that's what it's all about, simply a missions-oriented Bible school to teach the Word of God, to impart the Word of God into your heart, to make you go out there and share it with other people.
What about these books? It seems to me that if you are homeschooling your kids, these would be ideal books. But even right now, if your kids are in the Christian school, the public school, during the summer, this would be a great time to maybe get them involved in reading these books and learning a little bit more about God's creation. So are those available through your bookstore?
Right. I'm not a scientist. I'm a lay preacher. I love to read science books and make it down to very simple. So I've written these books in such a way that a mother who has no background in science can read it, understand it, and teach it. If she has home children, if she's trying to teach, she'll be able to understand it very, very easily. So I have about 20 of them now, very simple to easy to understand on all the basic issues of creation.
Well, again, all of those are available at Christ for the Nations and at cfni.org. Let me mention one last time, Volume 1 and 2 of Nature Speaks of Intelligent Design, and lots of great pictures in there. And if you have young people that are kind of interested in nature, this would really encourage them. And I know, Dr. Lindsey, you would love to get more and more of our students out there to actually major in science. For a long time, they stayed away from science because they said, well, they teach evolution. But if you're forearmed, you'll be able to make your way through that. And we need more Christians in the scientific disciplines, especially in light of what we were talking about with this issue of genetic engineering.
Amen.
Don't
Amen.
we need more of those
Amen.
individuals really
Amen.
standing up for truth? So we appreciate the stand for truth, first of your parents and of you as well, and the great ministry that you've had there at Christ for the Nations. So thanks for coming in studio today.
Thank you, Kirby. This has been a great honor and a privilege.
Just before we run out of time, let me mention that if you would like to know a little bit more about some of the individuals that we had a chance to talk with today, Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin was with us in the first hour briefly. And, of course, we had Dr. Dennis Lindsey. You have all the information about them on our website, pointofview.net. As you go there, don't forget we have that banner, Will You Stand Up for Truth? And we're talking about the need for us to end our fiscal year, which ends June 30th, just the end of this month, in good financial shape. So if you can consider what you might do to support this ministry and help equip Christians across the nation to stand in the gap while there's still time, we really encourage you to visit the website pointofview.net. Click on that banner. And remember also that because we have a matching fund, we'll be able to double your gift up to $10,000. So your gift of $100 becomes $200. Your gift of $250 becomes $500. It's all available at the website pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Shamila for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
Did you know there's an approved healthcare choice just for Christians that's founded on the timeless principles in God's Word? It's not insurance. It's MediShare. Over 189,000 believers across America who love God and share each other's healthcare bills. It's about half the cost of health insurance, and you never pay for medical practices that go against your Christian beliefs. Best of all, the healthcare law includes a special provision for MediShare members, so you don't have to buy insurance or face penalties. MediShare is affordable health care without compromise.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your health care. For your free information guide, call 855-BIBLE-11. Not available in Montana. MediShare, affordable biblical health care. Call 855-BIBLE-11. That's 855-BIBLE-11.
Cast your vote today for Point of View Radio. Please become a monthly partner at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.